since I spoke to any group of any size.
Wow.
So we'll see how this goes. I always remember right after, well, not right after, I'd probably been saved for actually probably 7-8 months. And the first time I had something that, an experience with the Lord that I wanted to get up and share in front of the people. And I got up behind the podium, and all of a sudden the people started disappearing. My face was so hot that it was like a fog went over my glasses. My glasses steamed up, and they became totally. I couldn't see out of it. Then the second time that I spoke, I was called upon to go to an outreach that was about 35 miles away from my home church. And so that was the first time sharing the word in any place. And so first time preparing something to share, and I got all my scriptures together, and I pretty much filled up a whole page, notebook page. And so I got there, and it came time for me to share. I started at the top. I'm not sure I really ever looked. And started sharing, and then I got, because I was supposed to share a good 25 or 30 minutes, and I shared to the place to where I didn't really know where to go from there. So I checked my notes for the first time. And I went down, went to the top, went down to the bottom. I was at the bottom. There was no place to go. I looked at my watch, and it had been 8 minutes. So, see, pretty soon I've already broke that record. I need to give you a little background, just so you know where I came from. I am part of a group called the Sons of the Pioneers. The Oregon Trail went right through my hometown in Oregon, La Grande, Oregon. And my great-great-grandfather came over on a wagon train in the mid-1850s, and they came through the Grand Ronde Valley, and then they went on to the Willamette Valley, and they purchased some land there, and they farmed there for, I think, about 5 years. But I don't really know whether it was too crowded there for them or what. 1850. But they had fond memories of that little valley, surrounded by mountains, the Grand Ronde Valley. And so they decided to go back to that valley, which they did in about 1861. And they bought farmland there and began farming. And so it went through, well, my mother was born there on the farm, and she also died on the farm. She'd never left the farm other than during World War II. She went back to New Orleans. My father was in the service, and she went back there to marry him, to get married to him. And other than that, her whole life was on that farm. And so that's kind of my family history. And when I went away to college, I really didn't have any idea as far as where I would end up. I didn't have a goal of coming back to the farm. And so I got my education. I was strictly geared, in my mind, high school, that time was a time for having fun. But then once you graduated from high school, then it became serious business. Then you're not there to join a fraternity or goof around or party or anything. You're there to get an education that you deem that you need to get the right job that you are, I'll say aiming for, but I really wasn't aiming for a job. I didn't know I knew what area I wanted to end up in, but I didn't have a particular job in mind. So, and actually, when it came close to graduating, the graduates from the school I went to, which is Oregon Institute of Technology, they figured that each graduate had their choice of 8 to 10 jobs waiting for them. They came to the school and recruited you, so you had a job before you ever graduated. And that was in the beginning of the Vietnam War. And one of the jobs that I was interviewed for was at the Hanford Project, which was, government. I mean, it wasn't directly working for the government, but it was all government sponsored. They had independent contractors there, but it was you were exempt from the draft if you worked on that project. So that was one good incentive to go to work there. And I worked there. I didn't work there very long. The first group I was with, you were able to go from you were able to work in a group that had a deal where you could try out different positions and see where you wanted to stay. And the first position was the most what's the word? Interesting. Those big words that there was just very interesting projects. It was actually, but it was your work depended on a company wanting you to develop a certain project, or you were going to try develop their idea to see if it was workable, viable, and profitable. And like one example is, or a couple examples, we did a project for NASA where they wanted to see these strategic bombers, the B-52s that have to be ready to go at a moment's notice. They want to be able to fire them up and go. Well, they couldn't because they had to fire them up and then they had to wait a certain amount of time to warm the instruments up. And they wanted to know if we could come up with a heat source that would always be on and keep the instruments warm so that they could jump in, fire the engines, and go. And that our group was the ones that developed that. And another job was with the Space Administration when they were, this is back when, this was before we landed on the moon. And so they were doing all these experiments going up in space, and one of them was the biosatellite, I think biosatellite program, where they wanted to send animals up into space and have them exposed to a lot of radiation while they're in space to see, and then bring them back and be able to check them out to see what effect that radiation had on them when they were in space. And our group was the one that made these little, it was very interesting, the little vials that were only about that tall and about as big around as a pencil. And we filled those vials with a strontium-90, which is just a very, very hot, radioactive-wise element. And that's what irradiated these animals when they're up in space. And it was just very interesting. We had to, our exposure to that vial before they were finished and welded and sent out, you had to limit your exposure. Even when that vial was in a lead cast, you were not supposed to get very close to it at all, because you would reach your maximum amount of irradiation for that month just extremely fast. You'd burn yourself out, so then all you could do is sit out in the hall and gossip. Which brings me to the group that I actually selected. Okay, the first group, your work depended on getting contracts with people that wanted work done. The next group I went to, they were developing fuel for the new fast flux breeder reactor they were going to be building there on site, which was the latest experimental reactor. And so it was a very high priority project, which meant you could work as much overtime as you want. You didn't have to worry about projects coming in to keep you working. And so I chose to work in that group. And the problem I found out with that group, well, one, the work wasn't very interesting. It was just kind of routine. They made all these plutonium pellets and uranium plutonium mixed pellets, and we had to actually, I don't even know, hundreds of thousands of these pellets. And our group, we would actually grind these pellets down on this little centerless grinder in a glove box, and we had to grind them down to a certain diameter. We had to then figure the density of every pellet. So you'd have to measure each pellet diameter, 2 different places, measure the pellet height, then figure the density, and we had to keep track of every single pellet we put in these experimental fuel rods. And once you got just one fuel rod, that was actually a bundle of rods, individual rods. And we'd send them off to a reactor in Idaho. They would put them in the reactor and run them through a cycle, and then they'd bring it back, and we'd cut them open, and then the ones that evaluated the fuel, they would do their thing. Our thing was getting the pellets and to the right size in their fuel rods, welded up, and yeah, so it was hundreds and hundreds of thousands of pellets. So we could work as much overtime as we wanted. And so, but the downfall I found with being on that high priority project, we got a lot of visitors, high government officials coming in wanting to see what was going on, wanting to take a tour. And when a government official was scheduled to come in, senators and things like that, sometimes they would paint the whole building. Other times, but whenever there was a visit, they would make us stop our work a good, I think it was actually a month. It might have only been 2 weeks. We had to stop work and then just sit around in the hall on the bench and talk. I say gossip. I say gossip like a bunch of old women. That's what I say. But then I've been told that I can't say that anymore. And me being raised on a farm and working and operating farm machinery from a very early age, that my whole desire on the farm was being with my dad constantly, even when that meant from the age of, I don't even know when I started, 5, 6 years old, started even riding on the tractor with my dad. This is just a single seat tractor, the old time tractors, and I would sit in between my dad's legs on the tractor seat, and I'd be with him all day long doing field work. And then I think when I was somewhere around 6 years old, he discovered that, because I knew how to do everything because I was with him hours on end, and so he would open the field up, and that means doing the perimeter where you were bordering other people's land or fences or things he didn't want to run into. He would open the field up, and then he would turn it over to me. He'd get the tractor going, he would jump off the tractor, and I would take over, and I would work the field, and he'd go jump on another tractor, so he would be doing a different operation in the same field. And when it came time for lunch, he had to catch up with my tractor, jump on my tractor going, because I couldn't put the clutch in. I couldn't stop the tractor. And it wasn't too long before I discovered that I could, if I could put my foot on the clutch, and if I pulled the steering wheel up, clear up to my neck, I could get that clutch in. So he didn't have to jump on and off the tractor anymore.
That's crazy.
And I was driving loaded grain trucks when I was, on county roads, loading and going, taking back to the granary and unloading from the time I was 9 years old. So I was used to working, and I loved working. And to sit around on a bench and not work just because a government official was coming just drove me nuts. And I could see the handwriting on the wall, and I decided, I do not want to end up like these guys. I want to be productive. So I made the decision to quit my job, and I got to bring another thing in here too. So see, I had no social contact whatsoever, because my whole life was consumed with work, because we could work all the overtime we wanted, and the way we'd work that, we would work like Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Well, not Friday. I can't remember how we worked it, but we'd work 3 nights a week overtime. If we worked up to 10 o'clock, then all of the next day would be double time. So we'd always work to 10 o'clock, a typical government worker, milking it. And I didn't notice when I started.
You're fine.
5 till? Oh my gosh. I gotta go. But when I look back on it, quitting that job God was in that. Because the other part that kept me from any social life was I was either at work or I was involved in a NASCAR race team. And so I was either working on a race car or I was at work. And a lot of times in my car building, I would work in my shop till midnight, and then get up the next day and go out and work at Hanford. So there was no social life whatsoever. And when I quit there, Penny's was just coming in. They were building a new store and auto center at the Columbia Center in Kennewick. And I got a job there in the auto center. So I went from nuclear power back to gasoline power. But working there, one day I noticed a poster on a telephone pole that it was advertising a concert in the park. and me with no social life, and I have to say that I don't think it was totally because of all my work on the farm. I was made kind of a loner. I enjoyed it. It didn't bother me to work all day long in the field. It didn't bother me not to have social contact. It actually bothered me. It was awkward for me to have social contact. I was just kind of a loner. And but when I saw that poster, concert in the park, the thought that came to my mind was, there might be girls there. So I decided I was going to go check that out.
How old were you at that point?
Oh, that's another thing. Well, I'll cover that
Time
shortly. I'll cover it now. At that time, I was approaching 25, age 25. Okay, so I went down there to just check out, see what was going on. And this was at Columbia Park, by the Columbia River. But I had a meeting, a race meeting with the race team that night. But I just wanted to go down there and see what was going on. So I went down there and I was just stood on the periphery of what was going on, and it was just totally fascinating, blew my mind. Besides the music, what it was the Jesus people of Spokane and the Jesus people of Seattle. They both converged on the Tri-Cities and put on this concert in the park. So this whole place was packed with teenage Jesus people. And since I had this meeting I had to go to, I was just stood on the periphery, but these young people were getting up on the stage and giving their testimonies. And to that point, I had never heard the gospel in my life.
Wow.
I had just never heard it. Even though I went to Sunday school in the family church,
That's so interesting.
I had never heard the gospel.
Wow.
And it was mainly their testimonies that blew me away, largely because these were all people that were coming out of the drug scene, and that many of them that had been addicted and had all these crazy experiences on drugs. I'd never seen a drug stronger than Excedrin, and certainly never experienced any of that. And so to hear their testimony, that was the thing that just, I was awestruck.
Wow.
I had to go to this meeting, so I had to take off and I left. But the next night I was back there, but instead I didn't have any place to go then. So there was the clamshell stage there, and that's where the talks, where the testimonies were given and everything, where the musicians were too. And then there was these bleachers that surrounded on the one side, facing the band shell, and the bleachers were packed with people. But then there was this large area, about from here to the wall, of ground space between the bleachers and the platform. And that whole area, semicircle, was just full of young people sitting on the ground. And so I thought that maybe the least conspicuous place, I didn't want anybody that knew me to see me there, like anybody would know me, the guy with no social life that has to go to the park to see, what's going on. But I went and sat right in the midst of all those young people. And again, just was blown away by hearing these testimonies and the changed lives when Jesus came in and delivered them from drugs, turned them around.
Wow, so good.
Amazing.
My glasses might fall good.
Okay.
Wow. Anyway, so at the end, they had the stage lined with young people with their arms outstretched. This was before they were going to give an altar call. But the young people that were on the stage with their holding their arms out were to just encourage people to come forward. And but in my thinking, I thought, you know, if going forward, I shouldn't have to go forward. If going forward works, it ought to work, because I didn't want to go forward. You know, I just that social thing. That so I figured if I should be able to just stay right there and pray, which I did. I was praying there. But I was kind of just keeping an eye on the goings on, and I noticed one girl that broke away from the people that were lining the stage. She broke away and she walked over to the side and came down the steps, and then she weaved her way through that crowd. And she came right over to me and put her hand on my head. And asked if she could pray for me. And of course I said yes. And the interesting thing was that her being a young baby Christian, she could pray for me, but she didn't know how to lead me to the Lord. And so the next night, there I was, came back in the middle of that crowd again, and same scenario. Had the music, had all the testimonies. Linda Meisner was there. She was the head, whatever you call it, the drawing card. She was an assistant to David Wilkerson, in David Wilkerson's work in New York City. I don't remember one single thing she ever said. What I remember is the testimonies of the young people that, you know, God was just drawing me. And same scenario, when it came to the end and they gave the altar call, the young people were up there with their arms outstretched. And this time, again, I was there praying on the ground, and I saw there was a young man that came from the side. He turned out that he was the sound man for one of the groups. And to this day, I've always wondered, I wondered if he was from Spokane, and I have no idea. But he came over, the same thing. He walked right through the crowd, and he came over to me, and he didn't put his hand on my head, though. But he looked down, you know, I looked up at him, and he said, "Have you accepted the Lord?" And I said, "I'm trying." And so I just marvel at the Lord in the whole thing. So he took me in back of the stage, back where it was quiet, under a tree, and he had his Bible, and he opened up his Bible, and in scripture by scripture, he led me to a word birth.
Wow. Wow.
And so I had he just did such a good job basing everything on the scripture and let me see the scripture. And so I left that place being born again. One thing that I to this day I think is quite humorous, because I'm sure he was used to leading young people that had all these wild experiences on drugs, and it's my experience in just witnessing people that have been on drugs. When they come to the Lord, you know, they've had all these outlandish experiences on drugs. Well, God meets them, and seems like most of the time, He beats the experiences on drugs by giving them a wild experience in Him. And so when this guy led me to the Lord, and we got done praying there, and he looked at me and he says, what does he say? How do you feel? Like, I'm sure he was looking for a wild report from me. And I said, I feel like crawling up and going to sleep. Because it was just the peace of God just so zonked me out. And that's really the thing that marks God's presence to my emotions to this day. Is the peace that comes. And I was not the typical person getting saved in a Jesus People concert, because I was, did I already say my age? Oh, yeah, I was almost 25 years old. And that picture's still up there. When I got saved, I was driving an El Camino with bucket seats. Now, the growth thing happens really fast back then, because immediately, okay, the next day after getting saved at work in the Columbia Center, at noon hour, I walked over to Shield Stationery and I bought a Bible. First Bible. I was going to bring that tonight. And that night, since I knew that on Saturday they were going to have water baptism. So that night after buying that Bible, I went to home, and I was rooming with one of my old work partners out at Hanford. That Bible had a really good concordance in the back. And so I looked up baptisms, anything that had the word baptism in it, and I read every scripture in the Bible on baptism. And in reading that, I saw the connection between water baptism and spirit baptism and laying on of hands and speaking in tongues. And from that study, and I thought, that sounds pretty wild. If that happens to me, then I'll know for sure this is real. And so, come time remember, I picked the most inconspicuous spot to sit to listen to the speakers. But when it came time for baptism now, there was, I don't know how many candidates there were. There was 3 teams of people baptizing, and I looked over the teams, and I picked, because I wanted to pick the team that knew what they were doing. And I picked the team that actually was the senior. For years had been a traveling evangelist. He was the one that pastored the Jesus People in the Tri-Cities. And he was out there in the water with one team. So I saw him there. I didn't know who he was. I just saw the aged there. The rest were just kids. And I picked that line. I want that guy to baptize me. And so there was TV cameras there, because this was a big deal, big goings on. And that didn't faze me. Now I got in that line when it came my time. Went out there and they dunked me. When I came up, they allowed time. We just raised our hands and began praising the Lord, and and they were speaking in tongues, and which encouraged you to not use English words. And that's when I received the baptism of the Holy Spirit and speaking in tongues.
Wow. Wow. That's so
And
cool.
then I was just, I was so lost. I was gone. But I had to stagger back to the shore. And when I reached the shore, all I could do was just look up and speak in tongues.
Wow.
And it was quite an experience. So then I began fellowshipping at the Jesus People place, and that person who had been the traveling evangelist, his Jesus People work was very successful. He had connections to seasoned, known ministry all over the United States. And he brought in these seasoned people. We would have seminars at least every month. They had meetings, I can't even remember whether it was every single night or so. We'd have all these meetings. I took my Bible to work. I read the Bible during lunch hour. When I'd go straight home, go flop on the bed and pour through the Bible at night. So the growth rate was fast. So when I was an old, seasoned Christian of 1 year old, I was asked to pray about going to one of their outreaches. Because the success of young people leaving drugs behind and serving Jesus since that was so successful, other towns were noticing that success rate, and they were requesting that they send us a team. We want the same thing in our town. And the leadership brought me in and they asked me to pray about going to Ontario, Oregon, Eastern Oregon. And I told them I didn't need to pray about it. I was ready to go. Because the Lord had been dealing with me on that. And so I told him I was ready to go. And I went home and I had to get rid of a bunch of tools. And I gave some away. I can't remember if I had ever sold any or at all. I filled up a wooden rocket ammunition box of tools and took them with me to Ontario. I had no idea what was going to happen, what we were going to do there, and I went down there. There was one other fella, and he kind of had a helper with him. So it was the three of us, and we just they had been down there before me, a few weeks before me, and they had procured an old, it wasn't that old of a building, but it was a former restaurant building on one of the main corners coming into town. And so we rented that and operated it as a drop-in center, and just began to go out in the streets, in the parks, and witnessing two kids on the street. And I was, again, very non-typical. Everybody else, all the other leaders that had gone to varying towns, doing this type of work with the kids on the street were all, I would say, I don't think any of them were over 19, and most of them were 16, 17, and 18 years old. And here I was going to be 25 years old. And, but it was my third year there. I'm not going to go into our courtship.
Oh, what? Why not? Oh, come on.
That's up to her. And she better not either.
Get to the juicy stuff.
Whenever that starts, it's at least a 3 or 4 hour story.
That's okay.
So, anyway, I ended up, so we started from scratch, and as kids responded to the Lord, and it was amazing the opportunities that came, that the Lord opened doors. I can't even remember how it happened, but the high school said that we could come up there, and they scheduled a school-wide assembly, a school assembly in their, whatever you call it, not the gymnasium, but auditorium, and for the group from Richland. They brought their whole choir down, and the choir, that was what happened in that assembly. It was the gospel choir, the Jesus People choir, and the young people that responded, that gave their lives to the Lord from that, was really the foundation of our work there in Ontario. So I had been there 3 years when we got married, and then we were there another 10 years. So I was there for 13 years. We were in 3 rented facilities, and then the Lord challenged us to buy land and build, and we bought 3 acres, and we bunch of kids. We actually had a grandfather, and he was out of Richland also. He was retired, and he was experienced in building, and he came down, took his trailer house down there. He lived in his trailer, he and his wife lived in the trailer house, and he was the foreman, told all of us what to do, and from I went down and got at the dozer off the farm and hauled it up there, and I dug the basement, hole for the basement, and then we formed up the walls, had the walls poured, so we did every single thing except for putting the furnace in the place. And we ran out of money, and we borrowed $10,000 from my folks, and we borrowed $10,000 from Carolyn's folks. And when it came time that I felt that I had done what I was supposed to do there, and I didn't feel I could take the people any further. And when we made the decision to leave, there was a mother, or grandmother? It was actually a grandmother.
That was an aunt.
Aunt. Carolyn said it was an aunt. That we had helped, and she when she died, she left the church there enough money to pay my folks and her folks off.
No.
And so we left there free and clear, the building free and clear, my folks, her folks free and clear, and we left. So coming from a place of stability to the extreme of my great-grandfather, coming to that that land, and that portion of that land is still in the family to this day. My mother, born on the farm, died on the farm. Then we come along after leaving Ontario, added it up. We have moved 18 times. I've had 18 jobs, and we're in our 8th house of owning our 8th house. So we're experienced at something.
We're experienced with God's grace and His mercy.
There you go.
It's powerful stuff.
Hallelujah.
Now, 45 minutes, honey, you've talked.
Wow.
And I don't know. I got 10 minutes.
You're good.
It's a miracle.
Okay, I am,
Gotta get to the good part.
The courtship.
No. Getting saved.
We want to hear everything.
when he went to the Jesus People Move concert in the Tri-Cities, and he was a straight guy. He's a good guy, straight guy, responsible in every way.
I was the only one in that whole church of young people that had a job.
These are hippies, and from the drug culture. And I was one of those. I was one of those. Okay, my husband asked me this morning, because I watch Reese on Tuesdays. He gets up, and we were expecting Reese to come today, and he comes in, and he says, you know, today's going to be a really busy day for you. Are you going to have time to prepare? I says, prepare? I'm just going to give my testimony. But my husband's been preparing, but he's very specific. He lays it all out. I'm just going to trust the Holy Spirit to give me what I need to do to share. Okay. But when I got to thinking about it, there's so many times I could share with my testimony, because my initial testimony when I got saved was powerful, because I came out of the drug culture. But the greatest testimony has been in the last 50 years. Because it's about being transformed. It's about being set free. It's about being
Wow.
That was powerful.
That's powerful. No, that wasn't you.
yeah.
Devil doesn't like her testimony.
All right. Can you hear me?
No.
No? Hello? Can you?
Put it right on the nose.
How's that?
All right. I could, my testimony, because of what God has done in my life, I can go back to the moment I was conceived and see God at work. So I could start at that point, but that would take 3 hours. I maybe at 3 years old, when there was something significant in my life, or maybe 10, there was something significant in my life, or 14, something significant in my life, or 18, the most significant thing in my life, because that's when I believed a lie and denied God, that God existed. Okay. When I was raised in a large Catholic family. There was 11 of us born in 17 years. And I was in the parochial school through the 7th grade. I went to public school in the 8th grade. And in the public school, I had a health class for girls. And they had a nurse come in to talk to us about hygiene stuff. And also about the changes that were going to take place in our physical bodies. Now, I just drifted off because of an experience of abuse from 5 to about 9 years old. So, and that was the pattern in my life. Things that were too challenging for me or difficult, I would just kind of, look out the window. But the only thing I got out of that health class was that when I had, I guess it's okay to say it, when I had my monthly cycle, that I was able to have a baby. That's the only thing I got out. And so I thought, oh no, when that happens to me, I was like 13 years old when I heard this, when that happens to me, I'm going to have a baby growing inside me, and boy, am I going to be in trouble. So I start praying to God, because I had a rosary under my pillow, and I would, not consistently, but I would pray, oh God, please don't let that happen to me. Please don't let that happen to me. Please, God, don't let that happen to me. And I was actually praying against it. Now, I have, in my family, my brother was first, and then I was the second born. I was the first of 8 girls in a row. And when Mom was 26 years old, she had 6 children. And I won't spend time talking about what a wonderful family I came from, even though they were, we were Catholics. And my mom had a faith. My dad, I just don't want to go there because I don't have time.
Carolyn, take your time, and if we need to extend it to another time, we will. But don't,
Don't leave stuff
we don't
out.
want to, yeah. Share what you want to share, that's what we want to hear.
All right. My mom was a mother. Motherhood was her destiny in life, and she wanted 12. And it was somehow connected to that woman in Revelation that had the crown and the 12 stones. It's a Catholic thing, but she had 13, she lost 2. But Mom basically raised us. My dad was a German, full German, and he was the oldest of 9 boys and 2 girls. And he didn't know how to relate to girls, so he had 8 daughters. And he worked 16 hours a day, a full 40-hour week, and then I grew up on a farm, a small farm, milk cows, chickens, raised, So he worked 16 hours, and he left the raising of us to my mom. So we didn't have that dad that was involved in our lives. And but Mom and Dad loved one another, and they rolled that out before us in a beautiful way. My dad only had eyes for my mom, and my mom only had eyes for him, and she honored him. And that was imparted to all of us girls, was this honor that my mom had for my dad. And we saw Mom so happy. She was happy. She worked hard. She was so happy. And my mom was a gatherer, and she had a big open heart, and she was very scheduled. She was almost probably half German, and then some Irish and some British. But she was very ordered and structured, and she taught us how to work. And When we would scrub the floors on our hands and knees, we'd have a rag and we'd have a toothbrush and a bucket of water. And we used the toothbrush and we got every little crevice. And every Saturday was work day. We worked the full day. And at the end of the night, because we waxed the floors, every floor in the house was waxed. And then we laid down newspapers. Saturday night, this is odd, we laid down newspapers, and that was to keep the floors clean, because there was 11 of us. That was to keep the floors clean until after Sunday Mass. And we'd get up and go to Mass, and after Mass we'd come home and we'd pick up all that paper, and then that was the day when we had company. I came from a very large family. Button Shown was my name, my maiden name. And when we had a Button Shown reunion about 6 years ago, there was 500 of us.
Oh my goodness.
Yes. I have 51 first cousins.
Wow.
Large family.
Wow.
And my mom had an open heart and an open home, and there were Sundays when there were 40 to 50 of the family would just pass on through. Mama always had a dessert, a pot of coffee going. So I kind of grew up in that environment, and now my mom and dad, they rolled out what a wonderful marriage should look like. They were just loving and kind to one another. And there was 8 of us girls. And out of 8 of us, 6 of us were divorced. And a couple of them were divorced 3 times. Now you gotta wonder about that. And I did, because I'm a wonderer. And it was, my mom was a gatherer, my dad was a scatterer. I grew up, my dad, both of them grew up in South Dakota. And when my dad and mom got married, they left South Dakota and they moved to Bellingham. But because my dad was the oldest and he had such an influence on his family, one by one the brothers moved out. And my dad, he says, I grew up, my dad said, when you girls get married, that's what you do. You get married, and when you get married, you move to another state. All right, so, well, we weren't afraid of getting married because we were going to be happy. You know, Mom was happy she was married. It didn't work out that way because those men weren't like my dad, you know. So now I'm going to go back to when I was praying at 13 and 14. I was praying that that thing would never happen to me. And there's a reason. There's a reason for that. When I was 10 years old, my mom sat me down at the dining room table. Now she's going to talk to me about the birds and the bees. And so she starts to talk to me about the changes that are going to take place. And as she's talking to me, this thing inside me, it's in my, it's in my spirit. It's in my unregenerate spirit. This thing inside me was dark, and it was moving like this. It was inside, it was moving, and it was growing inside me, and it was coming up to my throat. This darkness and I wanted Mom to stop talking, because she was talking to me that thing was active and started to grow inside me. But I loved my mom and I couldn't tell her to be quiet. So when it got about right here, I stuck my fingers in my ears because I couldn't handle it. And I couldn't explain it. And the reason I couldn't explain it because when I was 3, something happened to me with my brother. My brother was 4, I was 3, we were out playing, and we were under this tree. I don't know what was happening, but my mom, she came and she looked, and she grabbed me by the hand, she pulled me out, and she started spanking me. And I just was running revolutions around her, crying. I didn't know what was going on, but she punished me. I don't know what it was for, But when when the abuse with an uncle started to happen, I had no one to talk to because I felt responsible and it was my fault. So there was this dark thing going on inside me. And I wanted my mom to stop talking. So I put my fingers in my ears, and so she says, she tried 3 or 4 times to talk to me, but that's what I did. So now I'm 13 or 14, and I'm going, oh my word. I didn't say that. I said, oh, don't let that happen to me. So I was praying. Now this was the Holy Spirit. My mom had a big red leather Catholic Bible on the buffet, and I was passing through the dining room table and I saw that Bible. It's always there. It's like an altar, on the buffet. And I saw that Bible. We never read it. You couldn't read it as a Catholic because you're not able to understand it. You let the priest interpret it. So but I was drawn to that Bible. So I went over and I picked it up and I looked through it. I saw that it had a New Testament and an Old Testament. The old one was really big, had a lot of Renaissance pictures in it. And so I was just looking through it, but I felt compelled to read, and I was not a reader. So I went to the beginning to look for that little Latin word for Catholics. You're taught that you don't read anything that doesn't have this Latin word in it. That means it's been okayed by the Pope. So I looked, and there's that Latin word. So, where do you start to read a book? Well, from the beginning. So I went, Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was without form and void, and darkness covered the face of the deep, and the Spirit moved over the waters, and God said, let there be light. I read that, and I looked outside, and it was in the afternoon, and there was the light. And I went, light, yeah, that's good. Day 2, the firmament. Day 3, day 4, got to day 4, when God created the sun, the moon, and the stars. And I go, wait. There was morning and evening. Where was that light coming from? If the sun and the moon and the stars were created till the 4th day. So I had a question. But I kept reading, and I got down to God created the first man, Adam. I had no problem with that. When they taught evolution in the public school, the 8th grade. So I had no problem with evolution, but I knew God created Adam. So I had those 2 questions because I wanted to know if Adam was Neanderthal or a Cro-Magnon man. So I went to my mom and I asked her these 2 questions. And she said, Carolyn, those are mysteries, only to be revealed in the end. Okay, so I just lay it aside. Now I graduate from high school, and I know what I want to do with my life. I want to go to business school. When I was 6 or 7 years old, my dad was shipping manager of a printing company. And we would go down there, Mom, every Friday to get his paycheck. And I would go in there and I would watch my dad 2-finger a typewriter to send out the mailing labels. And I saw him do all this work with his hands and package these printing materials up. And it captured my heart. I wanted a typewriter. And for Christmas, Mom says, when I was like 7, what would you like for Christmas, Carolyn? And I says, I didn't know what it was called. I says, I want one of those things that you can punch keys on. She goes, okay. And so that Christmas, I was so excited, I opened up this present, and it was a cash register. I was really disappointed. It's someone that, a hero, I guess, somebody that I wanted to be like was, I don't know if you remember Perry Mason? Della Street. I wanted to be like Della Street. I never wanted to be a leader. I wanted to be someone that could support. She supported Perry Mason, but she was right there, a team. That was my heart. So when I graduated from high school, I went to business school. But all through high school, I took every class that was related to business. And so by the time I got to business school, I was able to complete a 2-year program in 5 months. Now, when I got my 2-year certificate at 5 months, I was still 17 years old. And my mom had to take me to the doctor when I was in high school because I had sisters that were going through their normal growth, and my mom was real concerned about me. And he just said I was a late bloomer. After high school, the summer before my senior year, it happened to me. And I was scared because I kept waiting for my stomach to grow. And after about 8 months, I thought, oh, it's not going to happen. So I was real relieved.
Wow.
And after high school, I grew 4 inches. And now I sent out my resume. I knew how to do a resume. I did my resume, and I took them to certain places that I wanted to work. And I was just 17 years old still. Only been 1 year or maybe a year and a half in my puberty. And nobody get hired. And I went and I talked to my dad, and after about 3 weeks, a month, I wasn't getting any calls. And my dad, he's a worker. He says, you got to work somewhere, Carolyn. So he wanted me to go be a clerk. I didn't want to be a clerk. He says, well, there's a place in town, a drive-in, go work there. And it just happened to be the hoppinest place in town, Cruisin'. This was 1964. So I got hired there, and the world began to have a pull on me. The life of fun and to be independent. And I was working, and it had such a pull on me. But I had this moral code in me that was imparted just growing up in a good family, hardworking parents, and so there was this struggle going on. Again, I was in my parents' home. I was 18, and I was drawn to that Bible again. So I pulled that Bible down, and I went to Genesis 1, and I'm thinking about it, and I'm wondering about it, and I read it again, and I had questions, and not only did I have questions about the Bible and about life, but I had questions and things going on inside me that nobody could help me with. So I was vulnerable. As I'm contemplating, I hear it's like my own thought. And the thought was, did God really create man? Or did man create God because he needed something to believe in? Now we know that's a lie from the pit of hell, but because I was still unsaved and unregenerate, I was vulnerable to that lie, and I agreed with it at that moment. I said, that's right. I don't need to create a God to believe in. I'm going to believe in myself. And it was like, that just set me free to, now the whole world lay before me, and nothing could stop me. So I did what I thought was going to be best for my life. I was the one that was going to find my happiness in life. So from 18 to 24, 6 years, that's what I did. I lived my life the way I wanted to. And I built my own world, my own little world. And it was perfect. I was so happy. You know, you can choose to be happy. See, that's such a pet peeve for me, that idea, you can choose to be happy. Yeah, without God you can, but it's different when Christ lives in you. Happiness, that joy comes from knowing Him, but So I had this perfect little world. I loved my world, and I was perplexing to my family, but I did what I wanted, and I got married. I was 20, I just turned 21, and I got married to this man, and because I felt that's the kind of a husband I wanted, you know. I wanted tall, dark, and handsome. That was going to make me happy, and he was just on the fringe. He was in the drug world. He was in the drug scene. My parents, my mom begged me not to marry him. My dad begged me not to marry him, and my brother begged me not to marry him. But I was going to do what I was going to do. And we went off to Las Vegas and got married. And this is where I had I had a little Mustang, a yellow Mustang, black convertible. We drove that down to Las Vegas on New Year's Eve day. And, no, the 31st of December. We drove down there, we got there at night, we went into the casinos, and he played. I don't know how, he played the stuff. I was not interested in it. I tried the craps table, and I got $40, but it was no big deal. But all night long, you don't know what time it is. There's no clocks. Everything is light. You think it's daytime when it's nighttime. But when we left, we were there about 8 hours. We came out into the park to get into the car. It was about 8 in the morning. And I'm driving, and he says, just pull out. And I says, we have to pay for the parking. No, he says, just pull out. And I says, I can't. I still had this kind of a code in me, moral code. I says, I can't just leave. And the young man, he's 17, he's walking over at the attendant. He walks over, he's walking, and his name was Bill. He says, I told you to leave. And I says, I cannot do it. And so he just took his fist and he hit me. He hit me in the side of the head. And he got out and went over to the casino. That young man came over to me. Now this was the Lord. God has been so good to me. He saved me so many times. But this young man come over and he says, he came down to my window. He says, lady, are you all right? And I says, I'm fine. He says, do you know that guy? Do you want me to call the police? I said, yeah, we're getting married tonight. And he takes about 4 steps back. And he says, lady, I know you're not going to listen to me, but I'm going to tell you anyway, don't marry that guy. But see, I knew, you know, so anyway, we got married, and he went deeper into drugs. He became the largest drug dealer in the Bellingham area. He brought all the new stuff into town, town. And I worked for the telephone company, but he didn't work. He just did drugs, and he was making deals. And he, without going into all of that, we were married for 2 years, and he was not just a drug dealer, but he was also unfaithful. He was, because this is when free love was going on. You know, the 60s was a very tumultuous decade, and this was 1967, 68, and anyway, without, you know, it gets kind of hairy, but so I'm not going to share those things. But at the end of 2 years, I actually got out of there with my life, because he had me he had me pinned to the ground with a 38. It was a 38 Beretta, and he had me pinned to the ground, and I was looking down the barrel like that, and he was in a rage, and because of a deal that had gone wrong, but at that point in my life, I was so hopeless, and I didn't care. I really didn't care, you know. And I says, "Go ahead, Bill." You know, there was no fight in me. I just said, "Go ahead." And he was shaking like crazy, and he put the gun down, and then he kicked me, and then he kicked the stove, and then he punched a hole in the wall, and then he came over and kicked me again, and he walked out. And that day I went to my grandmother's house, and 2 weeks went by. He never made any effort to reconcile with me, but I'm going to live. You know, I'm going to build my world. So and I continued to do that, but I was not going to have anything to do with a husband. And I quit my job, and so for a year I got deeper into drugs. I didn't work for a whole year. I went to this college town, Bellingham. I knew where all the parties were, and I was by myself. I went to this party. It was 11 o'clock at night. I walked in, and there's about 60 people in the living room, blue haze. They were doing all kinds of stuff, you know, hash and marijuana. And I went into the kitchen. They had a bar set up, and there was people in the kitchen, about 40 of them. And so I just got something to drink, and a friend, an acquaintance of my ex-husband, he sat down in a chair and he wrapped a surgical cord around his arm, and he injected himself. He died 2 weeks after that from an overdose. But when he did, I stood there and I watched him, and to this point, I really felt that, you know, the whole drug culture, I really sensed that I was looking for something, and I thought I was on this path like this, going up. And when I watched him do that, I had a vision. I saw a picture, and I saw my path, and my path was going down, and the end was death. And when I saw that, I put that drink down and I walked out, and somebody saw me leave. They came out and they hollered at me and they said, "Where are you going, Carolyn? The party's just getting started." I says, "I'm going home." And he says, "Where are you going home for?" And I says, "I'm going to go home and I'm going to get a good night's sleep, and in the morning I'm going to get up and I'm going to don a dress and I'm going to go get a job." So that's what I did. So I continued to live my life. I just changed my environment because I was good at that. I was good at eliminating the stuff out of my life that I didn't like, that caused me kind of conflict, and then bring new stuff in. Now I get a job, and I'm working for this land development company, and I'm working in the office, and there's things happening. The Jesus people movement are God's moving, but I don't know anything about that. I'm working, and there's 3 girls in the office, and my friend, she's in a situation that, I mean, she's so blind. This is so funny. I could see she was so blind, and I wanted to help her, but I needed to explain about a man's ego and about the id. And so I was looking for this book, and I asked everybody in the office for a book on psychology about the ego and the id of man, and nobody had one. About 10 o'clock in the morning, the head surveyor from the company, he walks in with his time cards, and he gives them to me at my desk. And I asked him, I said, "Would you happen to have a book that explains about the ego and the id of man?" And he said, "Yeah." Now, I didn't like this guy because he was a long-haired Jesus freak. He had a hard hat that had a big arrow, and it said "One-Way Jesus." And he was an irritant to me, and he was proud and arrogant. He just was. But I asked him anyway because I really wanted to help my friend. And he says, in an arrogant way, he says, "Yeah, I do." He says, "But have you ever looked into the book?" And I said, "Well, as a matter of fact, I have." And I was quite proud of the fact that I had looked into the Bible twice. And I said, never got past Genesis 1. But I was pleased to tell him that I had. And I says, and I've had a couple of questions. And I says, and I have asked, and I looked him right in the eye, because, I says, and I have asked holy people. And they don't have answers. They say it's a mystery. So the same old lie that the enemy says, anybody can interpret the Bible the way they want. And he says, well, why don't you come over to my office on your lunch hour, and I'll explain everything to you. Well, I think he had some ulterior motives because I just knew men, But I thought, okay, I'll come over. It was a day that I had to run into town to vote because it was on a Tuesday, and I was just going to run over to his office, nail him to the wall with my words, and then get out of there. So I go over, knock on his door on my lunch hour, and he opens up the door, and I'm ready to nail this guy with my words to the wall. And he opens up the door. He says, I want to apologize to you. I indicated that I could answer anything, any question you have, and I haven't even heard your questions. And I'm sorry, will you forgive me? Completely disarmed. A soft answer turns away around. Wow. Completely disarmed me. There was something in the atmosphere. He says, if you could share those two questions with me. And when I walked into his office, there was something in the atmosphere. It was the Holy Spirit. I didn't know that. I just walked in. I was completely disarmed and was listening. And he said, I told him my questions. He says, I don't have the answer for you. He says, but could we just look at that passage in Genesis 1 and let's read it together? And I said, okay. So he pulls the Bible down and he opens it up to Genesis 1. He says, I'll read it, you just follow. I said, okay. He says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, the curtain, it was like a curtain, like this, over my understanding, over my eyes, and it opened like this. And when it opened like this, I saw clearly. I could see into eternity.
Wow.
And I didn't see God, but as he's reading, I don't remember him reading, but then I hear a voice. I think it's me, okay? I just thought it was me because I always thought I was bright and brilliant, Even when that lie came to me, I thought that was just my mind talking. But this is what I heard, and it was God speaking to me. God said, I created it, and I never required you to understand it, only to believe. Wow. And he read the chapter, and I said, thank you, Harry. I says, I have learned more in these 5 minutes than I have my whole life as a Catholic. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Wow.
Now I am fine. I says, goodbye. And I go get in my little Volkswagen Bug. Now I'm going into town. Now I'm driving, just happy. I'm so happy with myself. I am happy with my life. I am just happy. And I'm just driving into town, and because I'm so happy with myself, it's like I a vision. I get another vision. I don't know it's a vision. I just think I'm just bright, you know. And I see here, I'm driving, I see right here on the left, I see this perfect little world. My world that I had built. And it was wonderful. And I was so happy with it. And I was so happy with me as the builder of this wonderful world. And then, over here, I saw 3 words. Love, joy, peace. And I went, yeah, that's what and I tried to bring those 3 words and apply them to this world. I couldn't do it. Now this is the Spirit of God reasoning with this darkened soul, independent, self-sufficient, built this world, and I couldn't reconcile those 2. And when I couldn't bring that to this, the understanding that was coming to me, I know it was the Spirit of God, but what I thought was love was lust. What I thought was joy was my manipulating my circumstances to make me happy. That's what that was. And the peace wasn't peace, it was no conscience. That's what that was. And that understanding came to me. And so here, now, when I understood that, now it went inside. And now the struggle started. The battle back and forth like this. And God was bringing me to a place of decision. I mean, I didn't know that. I'm just having this experience. And
As she's driving.
Grandkids. I could drive with my knee and roll a joint at the same time. I'm going to stop here. 2 months before this, I had this experience. I was, a friend and I had drove to Lake Chelan. He had a dog, a German Shepherd. He had papers over at Lake Chelan. We went up into Canada and came back to come down through through Sumas Crossing. And when I decided, I grew up, my dad imparted to all of us, you make choices in life. And with every choice you make, there's consequences. That was drilled in me. So when it came to the point when I was going to get into the drug scene, I knew it was wrong. I knew it was wrong. It was illegal. And I said, are you willing, to myself, Carolyn, are you willing to accept the consequences? There's consequences to this. Are you willing to accept the consequences of this? And I thought about it, and I wanted to do it, and so I said, yes, I'm willing to accept the consequences. So now I'm coming, and because I was willing to accept the consequences, and I was audacious and out there, I could walk down the streets of Bellingham smoking a joint. I always had a lid or something in my purse, nothing bothered me. So here I was coming into Canada, down through the Sumas border, and I was driving, I have a Volkswagen, I'm driving, my friend is there, the dog's in the back, we stop at the Border Patrol, they want to see the dog's papers. And so the dog has to get out of the car. No, I get out of the car, the dog gets out of the car, when the dog jumps out, he knocks over my purse, and the lid of marijuana spills right out there, And now all right, step aside. And pulls out my purse, and there's this lid of marijuana, and he goes, and that my poor friend, he had to sit over on the stoop, and he kept saying, I don't know why she smokes that stuff. I keep telling her to drink beer, but she's just got to smoke that stuff. He was going to be a lawyer, and he was so afraid that it was going to damage his schooling. But now, another thing is, on my side pocket, this was the Lord, on my side pocket of the Volkswagen, I had a legal-sized envelope, and I had this envelope inside a little Catholic devotional that my aunt had given me 8 years earlier that I never read, but I had it in my pocket, and I had this legal-sized envelope, and then you could see the top row of, it was a new product that came into Bellingham through my ex-husband. It was called blotter paper acid. Liquid LSD on blotter paper. It was a little dot, 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 dot. There was 500 hits there, and you could see the top row. That was in my car, and that was mine. I don't know what I was going to do with it. I can't remember those things, but when he picked that up out of that pocket, that devotional and that legal-sized letter, I could see that top row, and I thought, oh, this is going to do me in. But because it was a new product, they didn't identify it. We had to go into the office. They, both of us, and they took my car around back, went through it all. They were out there for about like 2 hours, taking everything apart. And every time somebody came in, I wondered if they were going to bring in that little devotional with that legal-size envelope, but they never did. And the first thing they did was they talked to both of us. One guy, one of the Border Patrols, and he dumped my purse out on the desk, and out floats about a dozen little baggies that were coated with white powder, and they were empty, but they were coated with white powder, and they were just residue of cross-tops, amphetamines, speed, and I had that floated out, and I had shotgun shells in my purse. They come down on the desk, but I had another friend. I had another friend who loved to duck hunt, and I would go duck hunting with him. And I carried extra shells. They were just in my purse. Then I also had this little aluminum half teaspoon, and that's something that drug users would use to liquefy stuff. But I never did that. I just happened to have this new stuff come in from Mexico called Acapulco Gold, and it was full of resin, and that resin was sticky, and I didn't like my fingers to get sticky, so I used that little spoon to do my thing. So, but all this falls on the desk, and the Border Patrol guy, he looks at me and he goes, "This is the Lord using somebody else." He says, "You must really believe in self-destruction."
Wow.
Well, that didn't bother me. That's fine. He says, then he went to interrogate me. So he pulls me back into a back room, just him and he took my friend, and my poor friend, they did a full-body search on him. You know. It happened to be a Sunday, and the matron, that was her day off. So So, I mean, I just skirted right through it, you know. But the Border Patrol, I was in there for an hour, and he began asking me questions. He says, where do you get this stuff? Bill Farnsworth. There's no honor among thieves. I gave him a whole list of names. He had contacts with police officers. He had contacts with judges. He had contacts with lawyers. And we grew, we lived 2 blocks from the city hall, the police department, and he grew 8 marijuana plants that were like about 8-10 feet tall in our backyard, over the fence. He harvested them right there, right in our house, dried them in the closet and all that stuff. He never got caught once or taken in. So that's how corrupt things were. But so the guy, he says, I gave him all this information, and he says, you know, you have enough stuff for us to press charges. And if we press charges against you, it'll be 5 years mandatory in the state prison. And when he told me that, this is what I said to myself. I said, well, Carolyn, you're a pretty nice girl. But you spent 5 years in the state penitentiary, and you're not going to be nice anymore. But those are my consequences, not a problem with it. And he says, but we can't press charges against you. We have to call the district attorney in Bellingham, and she has to come out here and formally charge you. And she has told us, Sunday is my day off. You do not call me unless it's an absolute emergency. He says, so we're going to let you go. We're going to fine you. We're going to pound your car, fine you. So they let us go.
Wow.
That was 2 months before I got saved. So now I'm in my Volkswagen, and God is showing me these things. And I can't reconcile them. The struggle's going on inside.
This is back to the Volkswagen. On the
Yeah,
day.
the Volkswagen, the day of my salvation. And I didn't know what to do with the struggle. But God was bringing me to a point of decision. I just didn't know what to do with it. It was going on inside me. And then the Lord, and I say the Lord because I don't know it's the Lord, but I saw a line. I saw a line drawn like this. And on that line, I saw myself. I was about this big. And I dove off of that line, and I dove off into my perfect little world. And I dove right into the center of it. And when I dove into the center of it, it went like this. This beautiful world that I'd created, it closed up and it went completely dark. At that moment, I got the understanding that if I chose that, I was never going to have another chance. You read Romans about being a reprobate, and God turns you over to something.
Wow.
That understanding came to me. So I went, oh, God, I want this, what you have for me. And I reached out and I grabbed those 3 words.
Wow.
And when I grabbed those 3 words, this shaft was like a shaft of light. Not just light, but it was His very presence. It came into my car. Okay, it came into the car, and it came right into me.
Wow.
It came into me, and it went down all the way to the tips of my toes.
Wow.
And when it got to the tips of my toes, it came back up like this. And it just came up, and I began to laugh. And as I began to laugh, the joy, as I began to laugh, something was coming out of that laughter. And it was like a fog. And it was like it had sparkles to it. and it filled my car. Now, I saw at Bethel Church in 2008, somebody had a videographer had videotaped a glory cloud.
Yeah.
I saw that in 2008 when they were able to, they showed it on YouTube. And when I saw that glory cloud from the worship at Bethel, that was it.
Wow, that's so cool.
I've tried to describe what I experienced. It wasn't until I saw the glory cloud, but it was a glory cloud that filled my car.
Wow.
At that moment, see, I was totally cleansed. I was a new creation. I was totally free, forgiven. You know what? And I didn't repent from one sin because I didn't know I had a sin. See? I didn't know how the darkness that was in me, but God's going to take care of that, you know. And when somebody gives their life to the Lord, they come out of something dark and let God have His way.
Yeah.
Don't try to make them be like a Christian. If they love the Lord, God's going to take care of them. So, but I knew I was different, and I went back and I told that guy what happened to me, what I experienced, and he said, "You got born again." And he said, I'll tell you this. He says, when I was at your office this morning at 10 o'clock, he says, I was walking across the parking lot to my office, and God's thumb came down, and he put his thumb right on my forehead, and he said, there is a soul in the balance of life and death.
Wow.
Wow.
He said, when I got to my office, I got on my knees and I asked God to forgive me. So, anyway, that was my experience. And now, I'm the same. You know, I got saved, this wonderful new thing. I was a conundrum. Oh, good place to wrap up. Okay, I'm going to wrap it up. I have, everything that's happened to me, I've got backstories.
Yes.
There's backstories. And I've shared them over the last 40 years to different ones that needed to hear those things. You know, but,
And we want to hear all of it.
Yeah.
We want to hear all of it. But we'll look for another time to do it.
It's so good.
How many more times?
Another times.
Another time.